Welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. I have a special guest with me today, Chelsea Pawlowski. Chelsea and I are going to talk about a topic that's come up in some previous conversations, which is how do you build a brand or create a brand in alignment with the culture of the organization that you run. So welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So the context of this really came back to this idea that some companies don't really have a brand. They may have a name or doing business as, but they don't really have a brand. Or some companies may have a brand and they've decided that it's not reflective of who they are for whatever reason. We'll get into a little bit of why that may be. But we're really going to stay in the context of how do you create a brand that's in alignment with, again, the culture of the business that you have and or in all seriousness, where you want to go with that culture. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So the first thing is, and we're going to use our own personal experience with this. I'd never like to talk in a theoretical sense. This is not one that I can borrow someone else's experience from. So we're going to kind of dive into our own experience of what it was like for us to go through a rebrand. When is a good time to make this decision?
Is there ever a good time to make this decision? That's the question.
There might not be.
Yeah. I mean, I know, Tim, it's something that you and I really kind of threw around for a couple of years before really taking action on it. And one of the things that I know that I learned throughout the process is there really isn't going to be a perfect time to rebrand or launch a new brand. There's always going to be big projects going on, big initiatives going on. It can be a daunting journey to go down. So I think it's more so identifying when it's not the wrong time to rebrand. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there definitely can be a wrong time because it is a big initiative. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different phases that go into rebranding, a lot of different parties that need to be not only present, but engaged. And if there's too much going on in the organization, if the focus is split in way too many different areas, it can be an even bigger challenge than just the challenge of getting yourself to the finish line as is. So I know for us, so kind of getting back to, we can use our experience as an example here to kind of take people through our experience. We had gone back and forth on when would be the right time to actually start the rebrand process. And I know we were in a position where we were about to get started, and then we were actually going to completely change over, we'll say, our operating system. So we had already kind of done some of the legwork to lead into the rebrand. And we decided, you know what, it's probably a good idea to take a little pause here. We've got some bigger fish to fry, if you will, right? And revisit this when we can give it a little bit more focus. You know, I know throughout our conversation, we'll talk through like what that process looks like. But again, you want to be engaged, right? You want to be able to give it the time and focus that it needs. And if you've got too many other things going on, it's just not the right time. So I kind of compare it to, I know we've joked about this some, but you kind of compare it to like having a kid. People say you're never ready to have kids, right?
Yep.
You're never really ready for it. You just kind of got to jump in and do it, and then you make it work. And I do think there's something to be said for that. But there's also times when you're not ready.
Yeah.
And so I kind of compare those two things there. And I think we ended up really being in a good spot when we did decide to move forward with it. So the timing definitely lined up.
Yeah. And I think for context purposes, we're talking about a more intentional process here. Not sitting around a campfire with a case of beer and coming up with a new name for your business. That's not what we're espousing here. This was a process, to your point, Chelsea, and there was a lot more involved in it.
Right.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about why, you know, obviously there's a lot of reasons why somebody may want to either change the name of their company or come up with a name for a company. But we were basically making a decision and had been, to your point, talking about it for a little while. Is the name of our business reflective of who we are now as a company and the culture that we're creating? And so let's talk a little bit about why one would go through a intentional process, not sitting around a campfire drinking beer, of coming up with a name or a new brand, because it's really beyond the name. It's not just
the name is a small component of
it's
it.
a tiny component.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great point because I think the first question you have to ask yourself is why are we deciding to go down this path of rebranding, right? There could be a plethora of reasons why an organization or an individual, for that matter, wants to rebrand. It can be anything from your audience has changed, right? The end client that you're trying to get to has changed. Maybe your business model has changed. Maybe you're just not feeling like your culture and your brand are aligned. And so I think the more you can dig into the why, what is a successful rebrand going to look like? If this goes perfectly, what does that look like? I think if you can really kind of identify that and paint that picture, it allows you to start to kind of ask the right questions to get to where you want to be. And so, we kind of jumped into this with when is the right time to rebrand? I think it's even kind of peeling it back a little bit and saying, why do we even want to rebrand in the first place? And so I think you really have to start there.
So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because again, we're not talking about a name and a logo here. That's a component of it. But really, you're talking about the story of who your business is, what your business is, to the people it serves, to the people that work there.
Right.
So what would lead someone, or what do you think some of the elements of what would lead someone to make that decision?
Yeah. So again, leaning on the experience that we had, we had a unique opportunity to really focus in on who we wanted to attract to our organization. We really built out what we called our target market personas, right? So we built out those ideal individuals that we wanted to introduce to our organization. And when we did that, we took a look at our current brand. It's not that it didn't align at all. It's just that we knew we could do a much better job. We felt like we had a really cool story to tell. We had a very unique value prop. And the name that we were branding under wasn't really doing us a disservice, but it wasn't allowing us to really tell that story.
Couldn't tell the story at all.
Right. And so it felt like we were going into meetings or, having conversations with people that we were trying to introduce into our organization and saying, well, this is who we are. This is who you may think we are, but this is who we really are. And so it's almost like coming into it at the defense, right? Which you absolutely don't want to be doing.
No.
And so I think that for us personally, it gave us the opportunity to kind of start from scratch, tell the story, have something reflective of our culture, who we are, who our team is, and then ultimately the advisors that we support.
Yeah. And I said it's not about a name and a logo, but that is a component of it.
Right.
And the truth is, if the name doesn't line up with the story, you have a challenge in either telling your story authentically or with credibility. So we made that decision that we needed something that was better reflective of who we had become, who we aspired to be, and that would be in alignment with us telling that story so that when we did present the name, which is a component of the brand, it all made sense.
Yeah. And not to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I think in our situation, we ended up kind of making up a name, right? Or making up a word, I guess we should say. And the cool thing about that is you have to tell the story then, right? People don't get to assume because they have no idea what that word is. And so
common question I get is, what is that?
Exactly. Which is such a cool question to be able to get because it gives you the platform and the opportunity to share the story. So
which it has for sure. So we offline talked a little bit about it's 3 years since COVID started this week, actually, March of 2023. How do you think, in a broader context, that experience has changed the landscape for companies, businesses overall broaching this subject?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. First of all, it's crazy that we're 3 years removed from that. I guess not entirely removed, but from the start of
Getting used to it.
Exactly. But no, I think it's a great question. And I've along the way kind of looked into this, and because you'll notice if you take a closer look, a lot of companies did rebrand either during COVID or shortly thereafter. I can think of a couple big names right off the top of my head. Burger King, right? Smack in the middle of it. GoDaddy was another one. And getting back to the timeline of like, when is the right time? I look back now and I'm like, wow, we did this in the middle of COVID. That doesn't actually seem like the best time to go in and rebrand, but it actually worked out, I think, really beautifully because throughout COVID, I'm maybe a little bit biased, but I think we did an amazing job of kind of keeping morale up and keeping people engaged. But what was cool about it is I think throughout COVID, people started, I'll say, like craving authenticity more than ever. And so you kind of saw that across the board. And I know, especially for our team here, it was the perfect opportunity to kind of hit the refresh button, work with our own team to really be able to identify, okay, who are we and how can we present that to our ideal client, I'll say in this case. And so to answer your question, I think a lot of other businesses saw that too, just an opportunity to meet their consumers or clients where they are and have a good understanding that the consumer attitude has changed, right? So people want different things than they did pre-COVID. That's just the reality. And so being able to kind of keep up with the times and realize what's going on in the world and present your organization in a way that is authentic and is appealing to the consumer, I think is super important. To me, that's the biggest reason. And I think that was a big why for us. Again, we had already been talking about rebranding, but I think the timing actually aligned really nicely because of what was going on in the world. But then I think you also just saw a lot of companies where maybe their business model completely changed.
Yeah.
I think that happened a lot across the board. And when your business model changes, sometimes your brand has to kind of change to keep up. So I would say that's probably the second largest reason why we saw a lot of companies rebranding and partially why we wanted to as well.
Yeah. And I think the COVID experience really kind of revealed, we've talked about this in previous episodes, revealed culture in a business. And we always talk about intentionality of culture, and COVID revealed it. It gave us and so many other businesses an opportunity, to your point, to really engage with people and try and connect in a virtual way for quite some time in a way that we hadn't honestly been able to do before.
Right.
Or I should say we probably could have. We hadn't chose to do it before. And it did help clarify the brand. And to your point, the timing is never right, but we finally saw the window and we jumped in.
Right.
So why don't we talk a little bit about the process? Again, I mentioned intentional. We weren't sitting around a campfire drinking beer, coming up with a new name and logo. This was an entire process to really draw out the essence of, first and foremost, who were we as an organization? And then to start to shape who we wanted to become and how to get those two things connected. So you want to talk a little bit about the process?
Well, you say that you didn't sit around a campfire drinking and coming up with names, but I feel like a couple of those names that you came up with.
Okay, maybe I did. But not the one we picked, all right? In full fairness, that may actually have happened. And I know one of them in particular came from that.
Well, and that honestly kind of leads into when it came to our process. I think one of the pieces that was most important to me.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yes, absolutely. It was some Greek.
Oh, yeah.
You probably purchased the domain, didn't you?
I did not. I did not purchase the domain.
But yeah, one of the things that was super important to me was getting the right people in the room. So I sit in a marketing seat, obviously, at the organization, but I am by no means the expert on rebranding an organization. And so I think as soon as we really started to get serious about, hey, we're going to do this, it was, let's start doing the research to bring in a team of experts to help shepherd us through this process. We didn't know what the process was yet. We had a rough idea, but we knew we wanted a team of experts in the room. So I would say that was one of the first things that I really sat with our team and said, listen, guys, I'm not doing this on my own. I want to bring somebody else in. I want to spend some time doing some serious due diligence on a creative agency that can come in and help us with this.
Mm-hmm.
It was super important that it wasn't just our team sitting around a table or a campfire or whatever that was, coming up with something. And so I think that when it came to the process, it was like, okay, that has to happen. And then figuring out who internally we wanted as a part of that process. Because that can be a tough balance. You want to have different vantage points and expertise sitting around the table. But you also don't want to have too many people because too many opinions and you're never going to get anywhere.
It certainly can end up in a land of no consensus.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Yeah. So I think as far as beginning the process, we already kind of identified the why. Why are we going to rebrand? When are we going to rebrand? Why now? Why is now the time? And then, okay, so what is that first step? Let's start the process. And that's really figuring out who is going to be a part of that process.
I like the way you recap that, Chelsea, and I'm laughing a little bit because of your reference point to that one name that will remain unnamed in this podcast that I did come up with around a campfire. But we really did the why do it. We talked about this, but the why really was we needed to be in alignment with who we were and who we wanted our audience, really the people that work here and the people we serve, to be able to tell a consistent story. Right. So that was the real why for us. And I think every business has got to figure out, again, this isn't about just a name and a logo. It's about how you show up to the people you serve and the people that work there. The second thing, timing wise, was definitely, which we did not. You made that wise decision for us. Don't do this in the middle of another major initiative. You still have the business to run. We made a decision. We did run under your leadership a very large project to basically transition everybody to an entirely new operating platform. Once we got that done, kind of saw the window and knew there would never be a best time for it, but there was a time for it. And we hit the window, I think, well, because more things came down the pike after that. And now we had the story and the brand. So really that third piece then is who's on the team. We made a decision, which, is a decision every business has to make, is we made a decision, let's actually hire people that are professionals that do this for a living, as opposed to us, again, kind of just blue sky names with a few people in a room. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing really was, to your point, who are we going to enroll in this process?
Right.
And how are we going to enroll them?
Exactly.
So I know in a future episode, we'll get into maybe a little bit more about that overall process we went through. But I think for us, at least, I think it's important to recognize if you do this in the way of a process, you'll learn a lot about yourself. You'll learn about how people perceive your brand now. We were fortunate that there was a lot of alignment in what we thought and what we heard back from the people we serve and the people that are part of the Pelora Group today, which was great. And we had to then organize ourselves with a diversity of views on the whole topic without getting too many cooks in the kitchen.
Right.
Yeah. So do we want to dive a little bit into that today as a setup maybe to another episode, or do we want to?
Let's do it.
All right. So I mentioned we decided to hire a professional firm. Do you want to talk a little bit about that undertaking since you and your team led that?
Yeah, absolutely. So
and why we did that?
Yeah. So as soon as we got the buy-in and everyone was excited about, we've got to invite some experts into this process for us, our team started doing, again, a lot of due diligence on some different creative agencies, some local, some national, some global, actually, to figure out who would be best for us to partner with. And that was a really exciting process to be a part of, because you get to learn about these agencies, other organizations that they've taken through the rebrand process. And all of the processes looked very different.
Yeah, that did strike me.
Yeah. And the one that we ended up landing on, which is Circa, and to your kind of plug earlier, we are going to spend some time with them. Tori, actually the co-founder and CEO, in the next episode to really dive into that process and how they kind of helped shepherd us through that. But in working with them, we really aligned with what their process was. I don't know if you remember, but we sat in the room and were like, this is kind of the process that we take, our clients through and our advisors take their clients through. And so that definitely resonated with us. But I think the most unique part of the process with Circa was the discovery process they took us through in the initial phases, which again, really allowed us to uncover our current brand, what our competitors were doing, and where the opportunity was. And I think coming out of that discovery process, everyone that we had in the room, which I think we can also get into who we kind of identified internally, was like, wow, now more than ever, we realize that we do need to go through with this. And so it was just, I'll use the word comforting to kind of go through that discovery process and come out of it even more bought into the fact that we really need to take advantage of this opportunity to tell our story better.
Yeah, because I think if memory serves me, we interviewed 4 firms. Yeah. But to your point, we'll have Tori Thomas on a future episode and kind of talk about how they do that because it was unique. And it definitely did resonate with us pretty pronounced way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we also, though, to your point, you want to talk a little bit about how we kind of chose who would be involved in this process?
Yeah, I think that, again, getting back to that balance of having the right people in the room, having enough different perspectives in the room, but not having everyone in the room. It was definitely something that we were treading lightly with, right? We were trying to make sure we had the right people. So when it came to that initial discovery process, we had our senior leadership team in the room. And then we also had our recruiting team as a part of the conversation, since those were really our team members that are really out in the community and telling the story. We wanted to make sure that they were very much involved in the process, since they were the ones that, again, were out in the community and understood firsthand what those conversations are looking like. And then obviously our whole marketing department was a part of those conversations as well. And so I think that ended up working out well because, yes, we had strong opinions in the room, but it was because everyone in the room was very passionate about where we were going to land. And I think that was important because we knew that any of the disagreements or tension that may be happening was coming from a really good and healthy place of just wanting the end result to be good. And so I think for anyone that is kind of entering into this potential journey of rebranding, it's to keep that in mind when thinking about who you want to be sitting around that discovery table, or even when you're kind of talking through some potential names and logos. You want to have people that are passionate about the brand and don't mind kind of speaking their mind, but not too many people, if that's it. Yeah.
So some people that are not shy and will say what's on their mind, but not too many of them.
Yeah.
Well, and again, a diversity of points of view.
Exactly.
And those that are tasked with telling the current story every day.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, and knowing that this podcast, right, is all about culture and making sure that your team feels seen and heard and is proud to come to work every day. Through that lens, we knew that as we started to land on a potential name and a potential logo, we wanted to open it up even further to start inviting more of our staff members and leadership into the conversation to get their feedback, because we have such a diverse group of individuals here, but also because the more that they were involved in the process, the more the pride that they were going to take in being a part of the brand. Right. So we literally got to the point where we had several different logo versions. Right. And we put it out on a poll, a very private, confidential poll within the office, and said, which one do you like better? How do you feel about this one? And it was great for our team to be able to get the insight of so many different people and see where some of our blind spots were. But also, I think once we were able to launch the brand, everyone felt very much a part of the process.
Yes.
And I think that's something that, there's always, hindsight's always 2020. You always look back and you're like, I wish we did this, or I wish we did this. But I think that's one thing that personally I came out of this whole process being the most proud of, is how engaged our entire staff and leadership team was throughout this process.
Yeah.
And I think it shows now in how they come to work excited to, it's so silly, but like update their email signature with the brand, or they want some of the TPG swag that we have because they were part of the build out of it. And you can't mimic that culture.
No, and I think that was interesting because I think the beauty of, again, involving people, A, in a process, and B, involving the right people is you build buy-in, and then you build a shared sense of, hey, this is our story. What was interesting, and we'll get into this in our next episode on this topic, a name is a part of the brand, but it isn't the brand. And when Circa took us through their process and then started showing us their creative work, I remember there were a couple names that didn't really resonate with us, we'll say that, but the story did. And that's what I thought they did a fantastic job of, was capturing the essence of the story of what the organization is to the people it serves, to the people that are, working in the organization. And to your point, which we'll get into next episode, we went through a process that we were able to involve a wide variety of people. So when we did finally bring this new brand, new story, new logo, colors, all that to light, we had a lot of buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, this may be a good time to call it a wrap for today.
Okay.
We're going to have Tori Thomas, one of the founders, co-founders, CEO of Circa, which is a marketing company we did work with offices in Nashville, Tennessee, Greenville, South Carolina, and Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Yep.
They, like I said, did a fantastic job. We're going to have them come in and share the process. We'll take a deeper dive. But again, for today's episode, it's really, why do you want to have a brand, which is really your story that reflects who you are? Get clear on that. 2 is maybe never a great time, but certainly sometimes not a good time.
Right.
So don't try and do this in the midst of another major initiative you're underway. And then really think about who you want to enroll in the process, whether you want to go this on your own and try and figure it out on your own, buy a book, download something from the web, or hire a professional company, make that decision, and then decide who in your organization you want to have involved is the foundational principles of how to get this whole process started.
Right.
So your story aligns with your culture.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Chelsea, thank you for being with me today on this episode of Winning Through Culture. It was great to have you on.
Thank you so much.
Be able to tell a little bit of this story. And, if anybody has any questions, we'll have our contact information as always in our show notes.
Right.
Feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to share more details on our journey in this sense. So
yes, thank you so much. Looking forward to our conversation with Tori next time.
Next time.
Yep.
And until then, stay impactful and stay relevant. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.